Hi, everyone. Um, so today's conversation is going to be about alternate concepts. When we look at the human experience, the human encounters, the human endeavors, we fall within several separate dimensions that includes the natural, which some of us are very vexed in terms of our career choices. I'm a natural scientist, a biologist to be precise. But there is also other dimensions of the human endeavors and encounters and experiences, as I had mentioned earlier, which includes spiritual or supernatural, social, secular, cognitive, conscious, soul. We have all these varied dimensions that we ascribe to. Some do, others do all of it, others just connect to one specific dimension, although all these several dimensions do exist. So this is nature and practice of science um, course. And so the idea here is for us to be able to understand where the nature of science, and if I should be more specific, of the natural sciences, where does it fall? And even of the social sciences, just the sciences in general, where does it fall within all these several dimensions that humans connect to? So the idea is to look at concepts, look at queries, questions, all these ideas that we tend to explore and and see whether the exploration aspect of it is something that merits mutually exclusivity. And I'm going to use certain specific topics to elaborate on it. So, in other words, this alternate concepts idea is not just under the natural sciences, which is what sometimes we are very familiar with when we think of the Kuhn cycle. But I'm going to use the Kuhn cycle frame to just go beyond the natural sciences or even the social sciences, so to speak, and look at how we treat alternate concepts and whether we should be mindful about the default to mutually exclusivity that we usually give to concepts in our quest to understand, explore, and understand and discover the world around us. All right, so let's look at this. So alternate concepts next. This next actually stands for S is spiritual or supernatural, N is natural or physical dimension of our lives. The I is intellectual or mental, and then we have the C, which is conscious. Some people think of the soul as the conscious aspect of our existence. And then the S stands for social or the secular dimensions that we ascribe to. Okay, so let me move on to the next slide. All right. So the first thing that came to my mind when I decided to do this particular presentation is first looking at what we determine as being real, what is reality, what actually constitutes our existence. Um, Humans, you and I, try to understand our existence. We are trying to understand our world, our universe. But all of this, as I had already mentioned, is being viewed in different, varied, separate lenses. So basically, that's the crux of it. And the framework here is to organize this understanding to bring out life, concentrate on being a biologist. I want to concentrate on life formation, the relationship across the very dimensional lenses. I will focus more on natural, social, and spiritual or supernatural, so to speak. So, as I had mentioned, the human endeavors, our experiences, our encounters conceive varied concepts alongside all other alternate concepts that are residing in these separate understanding. And is it necessary for all of this to hold mutual exclusivity. So I have already sort of touched on this understanding as the framework in which this conversation is going to look like, or this presentation is going to look like. So this is something that I borrowed from, you can see I have put the reference right here from a website known as I believe it says, yeah, Beyond Mainstream. Yes, correct. So Science Magazine for Critical Thinkers, that was the title on that website. And this is typically given as an idea of the Kuhn cycle. So I'm just going to go through very quickly, just to get a background of what the Kuhn cycle is about. So basically, everything that has not yet been explored by the natural scientists is termed the pre-science. So pre-science is anything else outside of the sciences, right? Any understanding, any theories, any discovery, anything outside of the sciences. It could be supernatural, all those different dimensions that I've mentioned, so far as they do not form these concepts, these ideas are not under the sciences, it's referred to as a pre-science. So once humans who are scientists explore these pre-science and bring some understanding to it within the confines of the sciences, it becomes a normal science. And these understanding within the normal science sometimes becomes the dogma of what we as a society may be living by for a long time, until new discovery bring different understanding, where there's different inputs and different well thought out work to bring more discoveries to bear, and then the paradigm change occurs. And then that change becomes, once again, the normal science. So this is the cycle of what happens within the sciences. And this idea is what I'm going to borrow to see where alternate concepts sit if they don't fully go through the cycle. Are they concepts that are discarded? Are they concepts that are diminished? So this is basically a way to frame what I just said. We have pre-science as all others, and normal science becomes the sciences, and it seems to fall under the dogma of what the understanding of that phenomenon is, sort of treading over all other concepts. So this is just the introduction of SNCS. To be more elaborate about it, as I said, the S is supernatural or spiritual, which is more in some ways about perception and experiences that provides a sense of outside of ourselves and outside of our natural surroundings. The natural is more about the composite self, individual molecular genetic elements of our physical self, and adding to the variants of life that we see around us in the natural sense or physical sense. I, for intuition and cognition, I had used the word intelligence, but it's actually intuition and cognition, which all falls within that capsule, is basically about this subliminal engagement within our subconscious, the recess of our mind, and consciousness and thoughts, and all of it embodied within that. The consciousness part, or sometimes the soul, is often connected to sort of being viewed as that glue between the natural and the supernatural in some form of understanding. But basically, that's the understanding with the soul, which tends to be fueled by consciousness, so to speak. But consciousness is basically our psychic entity that is sort of present before our before death, so to speak, which has that overlap with the soul. And then social and secular is basically the social elements of our society and organization of our structures, attitudes, activities, all of it. Usually the secular aspect is social encounters that is outside of religion, but so that's why I just put social and secular together. to just explore a bit. So basically, the one example that I would like to use, which until date becomes a bone of contention in a lot of academic settings, is the theory of evolution. And this somehow is going to bring some understanding to the mutual exclusivity that we tend to throw on this theory, that when you, as a biologist who is looking through the lens of the natural sciences, see the discoveries that is connected to evolution, somehow it is assumed by default that you will not have the faith in the supernatural or spiritual aspect related to creation. So creation, I'm not talking about creationism, I'm talking about creation, and the science of evolution seems to have some mutual exclusivity to it, which when you look at it very closely, those two are comparing apples and oranges, although both of them are fruits, talking about the same understanding, but they are alternate concepts that somehow is presented as being mutually exclusive, and that is not the case. So let's see why it's not the case. So basically, evolution is not, I'm not going to have a biology class here. I actually have done some recordings on just evolution alone, so I can send it over to all of you if you want to be able to look at that and listen to that. But basically, this is a way for us to understand that when we biologists talk about evolution, we are talking about a population evolving based on allelic diversity that occurs within that population by means of different evolutionary processes impacting that population. And this is more the molecular, we are looking at the molecular natural part. We are not talking about all the others, supernatural and all of it. We are just staying right in the lane of the natural sciences, not even the social sciences, just right in the lane of the natural sciences. And these evolutionary processes that is impacting population is somehow creating allelic changes within the population, and our alleles, which is of course the alternate forms of genes within our molecular structure, is bringing about the diversity that we see in our molecular fabric as organisms. So that being said, what are some of the evolutionary processes that can impact a population that would cause these variation that we see within populations? One of it is natural selection, which is very, very common. So natural selection is basically talking about some kind of factor that hits a population that causes a specific group of organisms that have a specific kind of allele to probably become extinct or probably survive, whichever way direction it goes. And that being said, it causes the remainder of that population to not have that kind of allele available within it. So therefore, the expression that comes from that allele is no longer within that population, and hence there is visible changes to that population down the line. It could be abrupt, depending on what the situation is with evolution, or it could be something that takes a protracted time for it to occur. Another is mutation, where again, there's a genetic situation that occurs, and then what turns out happening is that this genetic change is going to cause the allele to also change, and therefore the expression of it will change as well. Gene flow is when alleles enter or leave, migration, immigration, and emigration. And again, the pool of allelic combinations will cause a diversity in that population. We have genetic drift. The bottleneck is one such an example, where just a group of population, subpopulation having specific kind of alleles may start a kind of maybe even founder's effects that would cause only specific kinds of allele to be prevalent in a population that gets formed. All right, and then we have selected mating. If a specific kind of organisms that carry specific allelic traits are just mating within themselves, that in itself, their offspring would just be offspring that carry those kind of alleles that is within those population alone, and that in itself can bring about a population to change from what it was before. So this is just a quick 101 overview of the understanding when it comes to evolution. Populations evolve, individuals do not evolve, but they modify with descent. But then there's that element of speciation that usually is confused with evolution. Speciation is the formation of new species. Okay, sorry for the background noise. Speciation is the formation of new species, and I have this illustration here for us to look at how speciation takes place. And most people confuse speciation with evolution, and it's two separate things. So let's start off with here, evolution, right? And I'm just going to use these organisms here as I just threw this out there. So we have sponges. Hold on one second, sorry about that. We have sponges. I'm using sponges as an example, which falls within its own species type, jellyfish. We have the sea star, we have chimpanzee, and humans, Homo sapiens as example. Again, we don't have a chimpanzee species. I'm just trying to say that the family that it falls under. So this is just a quick thing that I was trying to say. So sponges within their species, jellyfish within their species, sea star within their species, chimpanzee within their species, and homos within their species, okay, or humans within their species. So I'm going to mention some specific things biologically that it's not here, but just bear with me and move along with me. So what is the relationship that we are using to sort of see how these organisms are related to each other? What characteristics are we using? When it comes to phylogenetic relationships, the first criteria that biologists will use to see how organisms are closely related to each other and how close they are related to each other is a molecular closeness. The molecular closeness is a priority, is a first thing that they would put more weight to, not the anatomy, not the morphology. The molecular is the most important part that they would use. So basically, with the molecular part, it includes the DNA, the DNA, absolutely, the nucleic acid material. Let me actually say that, biochemistry, biodiversity, the biochemistry aspect of it, that and physiology, all of these are molecular in nature, which serves as the blueprint that produces the biodiversity that we see. And then from there, after they've seen how close they are molecularly, and they've sort of connected which ones are very much related to each other in that order, then they'll move on to developmental phase of these organisms. Embryological studies and all of that will throw more light into which ones are then the next closely related, and then it goes on and on and on, lastly to morphology, anatomy, function, and all of that, to see the close relationship that it remains within the group of organisms that you are trying to see their relationship with each other. So that is the phylogenetic tree process, or the tree of life, so to speak. So what we look at is shared characteristics. The common ancestry is not some caricature of an organism that form different things, which is usually the concept that people are carrying. We had a common ancestor who had every kind of craziness as part of it, and then it evolved to form different species as we see it. From plant, give birth to a plant and an animal. Like that's the concept that sometimes it's being carried, and it sounds awkward, but that is some understanding that I've gleaned myself from speaking to individuals about their understanding of evolution. So again, I have already spoken about evolution, but I am starting with relationship among organisms for us to understand speciation and understand how evolutionary process that has occurred within populations. So when there is genetic diversity that occurs in a way that the population can no longer belong to each other, because by definition, a population is a group of organisms that belong with each other. So when there is a genetic diversity that doesn't allow the connectivity, one such speciation is biological speciation, biological species where they can no longer interbreed and all of that, then it creates a separate speciation. All right. Again, this sounds very biology right now, but bear with me because having this fundamental understanding will help with the rest of the explanation that I have with reference to alternate concepts. So, so let's look at these organisms that I've just thrown out there. So all these organisms, when you look at them molecularly, they are made up of cells. We have two types of cells on the planet Earth as of now. We have the eukaryotic cell and the prokaryotic cell. And so all these, the Homo species, humans, chimpanzees, sea stars, jellyfishes, sponges, are related to each other only because they're made up of the cell called the eukaryotic cell. So that makes them siblings, so to speak. Now, which of them are more related to what? Which of them are more closely related to each other compared to the others? How are we deciphering that? Well, when it comes to the sponges, so all these organisms are still related to each other because they're eukaryotic cell. The other thing is that they are part of this. They are unicondyrs when you look at their developmental stages as well. One-tailed cell reproduction aspect of it. So it puts them together in the same group. And then another characteristic is that they are all animals. Now, why are they animals? Because, well, they are multicellular organisms. They do not photosynthesize, and then they ingest food. They have a cavity and they ingest food. So these are some of the characteristics that allows that biologists look at. Just is really nerdy, molecular in nature, that they use to characterize what an animal is. So when they see any organism that is multicellular, it doesn't photosynthesize, it has it ingests food, they will call it an animal. All right. So that's why all of these are animals. Now, I mentioned that animals are multicellular. So in the multicellularity aspect of animals, they have true tissues and false tissues. In looking at sponges, they have false tissue. So they sort of are separate from the others because all the others have true tissue. So it means that the jellyfish, sea star, chimpanzees, and humans are more closely related with one another compared to the sponges, which diverge because they don't have true tissues, they have false tissues. So now what next? Let's see how these remainder of the four are closely related to each other. Well, during the developmental stages, the tissues form two layers. We have, and then three layers, diploblast and trypoblast. The jellyfish forms diploblast. The other three form triploblastic layers in their developmental patterns. So guess what? The sea star, chimpanzee, and humans are triploblastic, so they are more related to each other compared to the jellyfish that also branched off. Okay, I hope you are moving along with me, right? Okay. Now, what about the sea star, chimpanzee, and Homo species? Okay, all these three, the human, chimpanzee, and sea star, during their development, the first hole, the blastopore that gets formed, which is the gut, because remember animals ingest food as well. They form what we call the blastospore. The first hole that gets formed forms the anus. other organisms like insects and all of that, it forms a mouth. So one of the reasons why the humans, chimpanzee and sister are relatives is because the first hole, the blastospore, forms the anus, and that's what makes them related to each other, and all, together with all those other things, more related to each other, together with all those other things that was mentioned as being unit contest and triple blast and all of that. Okay, so now as for us humans, are we more related to the chimpanzee or the sea star? What other molecular characteristics did biologists look at in order to create that relationship between these remainder of the three organisms that we are going to talk about? Well, the sea star being a deuterostome stays there because then we have all these other characteristics that keeps bringing the dichotomy that we see. One such aspect is having the vertebrates, which the sea star isn't, and the chimpanzee and humans are vertebrates. The other thing that we have other vertebrates like dogs and the rest, but the chimpanzee is more related to humans only because we are also all primates. Well, the monkeys are primates too. So yes, we are related to monkeys, we are related to all other primates, but the chimpanzee and humans are all apes. So that's why the chimpanzee is more related to humans. And then we have other apes, orangutans and all those bonobos and all those things. So they will look at more deeper characteristics, anatomical features, because now it's getting closer and closer. Our closest relatives are all extinct because we have other Homo species that are all extinct. So that's why I put Homo there to show that the Homo species closest relative is the other, because the Homo species are actually apes, and then they diverge to form the Homo species. So anyway, so that being said, this is showing the characteristics and all the elements that biologists are using to show how organisms are related to each other. But for each of these species, speciation can occur. The populations, so what is a population? Population is a group of species that belong to each other. So each of these populations can evolve. As you can see, I have it written here. So human populations are evolving. So we can evolve and we'll still be part of the same species. Chimpanzees that belong to their group of species can also evolve and continue to belong to that same population and that same species. But speciation can occur once there is what? Genetic diversity, which I have written here. Okay, so evolution can occur with all these evolutionary processes, but speciation can occur when there is genetic diversity that causes a separation of the population because the population can no longer belong to each other. And there are different speciation processes that sympatric and allopatric speciation that is a different conversation altogether that brings about that genetic diversity and causes the separation altogether and produces two separate populations. And that's what you're seeing over here. So that being said, where does all this leave us? Okay, I decided to use explain evolution and speciation only because I wanted us to look at alternate concepts outside of the natural sciences when it comes to life forms, right? So this Kuhn cycle paradigm that I have adapted is going to walk us through some process. So we have a phenomenon that we want to understand about life forms. So I've just bored you and explained a biological concept of evolution and speciation about formation of life in the molecular lens, in the natural science lens. But what about anthropological, which is social science? What about supernatural? Creation, let me just be direct in that sense, where it talks about life forms being created by an entity that, for the common name used for this entity that is beyond humanity, so to speak, within and beyond humanity, so to speak, people refer to as God, right? That author of all, so to speak, that people ascribe to, like myself. I'm not going to deny that. So what concept of, where does that concept fall, right? Is it that when we can understand the natural science of evolution and speciation, does it negate the spiritual or supernatural understanding of a creator creating life forms? Or those alternate concepts can remain separate because they fall under different dimensions? So that's the crux of this conversation. So basically, instead of writing pre-science, I have here phenomena not yet unearthed, right? And then there is an understanding that is thrown into this phenomenon. Back in the day, it was religious understanding of things, and it becomes the dominant concept, okay, in that particular dimension. So religion had all these interpretation of what they think things were, and it was the dominant concept for a long time. And then the dimension of the natural sciences, the natural dimension of our world comes in and does a discovery from a molecular lens. And then now there is the crisis and drift and all those things, and it creates a paradigm change. So then instead of having alternate concepts that seem to, we need to delineate to fall within their respective dimensions, we tend to hold one dominant over the other. And that is, in my opinion, the real crisis of education, because we are trying to overpower, discover concepts to overpower other concepts. And that in itself is creating a huge problem. So for what you are seeing here, we have a dominant concept, 1A, and 1B is the alternate concept. So at some point, it was some religion concepts about life forms and whatnots that was not biologically looked at from a molecular perspective. And that stayed as a dominant concept. And then everything else was alternate concept. And then the sciences came and brought about the discovery more of evolution and speciation concepts, and then it changes. Now that becomes a dominant, and then it's diminishing the creation story, so to speak. So that is an issue. But how, so it becomes, we enter into all these crises, and then we have this modern revolution, and then we have the paradigm change. So instead of making 1A dominant concept and 1B alternate concept, 1A remains as a alternate concept, and 1B remains as an alternate concept within the separate dimensions in which they fall. So that's why I use one A and B, the number 1, to represent both. And call it and separate it within their dimensions. So when we are talking about life forms and formation, we are talking about it from a natural science umbrella, from the natural physical dimension aspect umbrella. So basically, that is the gist of what I wanted to present. I have the paper that I wrote has more in-depth into this exploring of all these different concepts in understanding the different aspects, using evolution as an example. So yes, any questions? Please send it to me. I was hoping this was going to be a more engaging back and forth, but as we have it set up, I'm going to give this presentation as is, without going too much into details, and the questions and discussions will sort of bring out a lot more that is within this understanding. So thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to any other inputs and questions. So let's do that. Let me stop the recording, and then let's do that. Thank you.